the way this is set up in webinar format, for those of you that are new to it, if you are, the only people you can see on your screen are the panelists. You can't see the participants. We do that because we have such a large crowd of participants. So that's why you can't see anybody but the panelists. If you can't see the panelists, then that's a problem likely on your end. So I can't help you with that one. Rebecca, so far, I think you're all I see. I can't tell if anybody else is on there that I need to change privileges with. Do you know? All right, it's a little late. It's a little after 2. Let's go ahead and get started with, let's see, Rebecca, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here with Brian Abraham.
Okay, you got Brian on, so I'll go ahead. We'll go ahead and get started with you, Rebecca and Brian from the governor's office, and just sort of give you the floor to just let us know. We haven't had anybody from state government on yet because you guys have been so busy, but we want to just sort of get an update of what's going on, and you know, anywhere you want to go. A lot of us watch the daily press conferences and so forth, but just wanted to hear from you guys.
Okay, thank you. I mean, at this point, we truly are still drinking from a fire hose every day, so handle issues as they come to us. If anyone has any questions for us, we'd be happy to try to tackle the individual questions or provide any resources that we can.
One of the things that we try to do, and it is certainly drinking from a fire hose is a good analogy, is we wanted to get Scott on one of these from Workforce West Virginia, because obviously we have a lot of folks that are trying to figure out what to do and how to do it. But obviously you can't even get through to those guys. So a lot of our folks' questions come from are about the what's going on with unemployment for independent contractors and so forth.
Okay, this is Brian. So the plan right now and what we believe we're going to be able to execute on is Friday night at 10 o'clock the portal will open for those independent contractors and self-employed. As they make application, there will be a way to reach back, if you will, and have some retroactive benefit. We've added additional employees and additional staffing on Friday evening in that late hour and through the morning of Saturday to try to accommodate what we believe will be an avalanche of new claims filed. As far as the backlog goes for those current claims, we believe by week's end we're going to have those completely caught up. We've processed well in excess of 100,000 claims thus far, and we're hitting at a rate now, given the new technology they put in place with the new Connect program. We're averaging 12 to 15,000 claims per day processed.
I can say though, from my own personal experience, he was an independent contractor, but my son schedule is he was as an employee at Ruby Memorial, worked 38 hours a week and applied for unemployment on April 3rd, and today got his letter that he'd been approved. Hasn't got a check yet, but in terms of the high volume, I'd say that's a pretty quick turnaround. So I think those guys are really are busting it over there and doing a great job.
They're catching up. We obviously had some growing pains at first, given the number of claims that came in, above and beyond what was the average. But we think we've adding the additional staff and the new technology, we're going to be able to handle that in short order.
Any other questions for the governor's office from everyone? Brian, here's one that's popped up. Do you know of, or Rebecca, is there any, and Chris, if I'm going to unmute you if you want to chime in as well. Do you know, is there any kind of documentation for independent contractors that's different, or is it just the normal process?
No, I think it's, and again, I'm not in the details of what's going on, but I believe there has to be at least some verification of what your income source was and the amount of income. And I think they're trying to be lenient and allow even bank statements and things like that. But you do have to be able to document the income so that they can verify some form of employment. I think you'll have issues if you're the truly under the table type of employee that works on a cash basis only, and that there's few markets where that exists, but those people are going to have trouble getting benefits because they're not going to be able to document the income.
Well, Mark Slotnick's the only one I know that gets paid under the table, so I think we're okay for our members. Chris,
I think Mark gets paid on top of the table, beside the table, under the
table. Chris, do you have anything to add to that? Do you know of anything different for independent contractors?
Well, what I've read under the release that Workforce has put out is that they will take bank statements, 1099s, or the prior year Schedule C. And I would advise everyone to get their Schedule C prepared for 2019. I know it's not due, but they're going to need it for unemployment, and they're also going to need it if they want to apply for the payroll protection loan, because that's what the bank's going to require.
Okay. And any questions you have, don't do it in chat. Please go over to the Q&A bar. Put the questions if you want me to ask any of our panelists in the Q&A, not in the chat. The chat moves too fast for me to catch up that way. Anything else that you guys, is there anything we can do other than stay home and listen to the governor's order?
Well, we know that you guys have remained in business, and I understand, both from hearing outside attorneys as well. My wife's got a real estate firm in Logan, that business has pretty much been stable in your industry. So we're hoping that, with the interest rates and things being as they are, we'll at least continue for some time. Although I know everybody's going to go through a growing pain with the loss of employment. You may see some downturn, but we're attempting very quickly here in the governor's office to try to get the engine restarted, get the economy back together. We're hoping with the federal resources that come in, we're going to be able to backfill much of what we may be losing here at the state and the county and the city level. So we're hoping our private industries can rebound as quickly as well. But, we're happy to keep answering your questions, but I can tell you that is the next thing the governor's got us focusing on, and that is, our plan to come out of this thing and get our economy going.
Yeah, we were very fortunate that you allowed us to remain essential. We were able to close a lot of deals that would have been lost that were 2, 3, 5 days from closing. It's been tricky, and we've had to do different things, but we found ways to continue to work and still stay safe and follow the orders. We've got one issue that is, and I'm not sure that you guys can deal with it, Brian, but it's county to county. The difficulty we're having is the way, some county courthouses are opening, some aren't, and so forth. And so that's an issue for us, because if everything else works and we can't get the deed recorded, then there's a problem.
Yeah, and I would expect that would be one of the first things that come back as we reopen, is our governments on the county level are going to have to be more proactive in coming back and better staffing their courthouses. We obviously allowed them to determine, what their essential employees were from a standpoint of who they needed in the courthouse, and each county has made different choices. But that's something that they're going to have to deal with. But we obviously know that our government is going to have to function and provide that to our businesses and to our citizens. So I expect, and it's a very short-term problem, you're going to see as we restart this thing, the government's going to have to be at the very forefront of coming back and providing that to everybody.
I do think one of the things that all of us need to be thinking about in our homes and in our places we need to get stuff done in advance is, how do we practice social distancing and still be able to function as a society and do things in the courthouse without being on top of each other, et cetera. I think all of us thinking about that can probably save ourselves, speed up the comeback.
Absolutely. I've got another question now of, do you have a timeline or in a time frame in mind for when state parks might be open for business again?
I couldn't tell you we have a specific time frame. Obviously, the governor is the biggest promoter of tourism industry. So that is something that, I think was very close to his heart, that he had to close those down because he realized the benefit they provide to our state. The necessity for that was we had a lot of out-of-state citizens were coming and using our parks for shelter from away from the more populous states that were already being designated, hotspot areas, if you will. As that lessens everywhere, and the need for it to return to a true tourism type business as opposed to a shelter in place business, I think it's the very first opportunity the governor's going to ask those to be opened back up.
Okay. Clarification on the $100,000 block grants. Can you give us some clarification on how those can be used?
Yeah, the governor put those out as what he intended to be a short-term bridge until the federal money arrived, hoping that any county that was running short of funds for non-ordinary expense would be able to apply that to those costs as they were incurred based on the COVID virus. We put out a pretty detailed letter to each of the county commissions where we also asked that they share the money with their municipalities and towns as best they could to cover the additional cost of all first responders. Now, that was the letter that advised that. It contained the language as we had gotten it from the federal authorities as they advised us how funds we'd received from them could be expended. However, the governor put out a little more general guidance and said that any kind of expense that was COVID related, he would be okay with. So that meant if a county or a municipality wanted to make some form of hero pay in the terms of overtime or something of that nature, he would not be opposed to that. We had one county up in northern West Virginia that said they intended to spend theirs on the personal protection equipment for their first responders. And then if they had additional monies left over, they intended to buy that for some of the essential workers out in their industries there in the county. So we were completely comfortable with that. So, we've tried to be very loose in our interpretation of what that money can be used for. Obviously, as the federal money arrives and there's any ability for counties and cities to participate, we'll all be under those federal guidelines that are usually monitored pretty strictly and usually have penalties associated with them if you spend outside what they've told you can do. So we'll be putting guidance out on that as those monies come in, not only from how we may all participate in it, but what those restrictions might be.
Is there, thank you, is there any plan, as you can imagine, particularly in, it's a problem we talk about on a regular basis, but particularly in Morgantown and Huntington, which has the highest number of probably tenants in the world, but they're also very unique, is that probably 99% of the leases come due in May and all at one time. Mm-hmm. And leases have already been signed. So particularly with the courthouses both closed and not doing anything in terms of evictions and things like that, is there any state plan to help deal? Because when the courthouses do open back up, this is going to be a huge backlog. Is there a state plan to help develop that, or is that going to be answered, or the county's going to look to that county by county to deal with the backlog?
I think that's going to end up being, as you've identified, those are the two primary areas where you'll have that kind of concern associated with the student turnover. I can tell you we haven't put together any kind of plan because that, quite frankly, wouldn't be controlled by the governor. That would be handled at the county level in the circuit courts or in the magistrate courts depending on what the action is, whether it be enforcement of contract or whether it be eviction. So that would be something that probably would fall outside of our bailiwick, where we would not be involved in that.
Will licenses for medical marijuana be delayed from the original May date with all this that's going on?
Okay. We had checked with Secretary Crouch a few weeks ago to see if that program was still progressing, and they still were up and running. They had not shut the program down. They were still evaluating the applicants, and they do expect there might be a very slight delay but that would be it. It's not that it's been suspended or anything based on this. There is a stood up office. It's performing its task, and they will be making the recommendation to the secretary very soon.
Okay. I got two that basically fall along the same lines. I think I can mostly answer this. We talked about it last week. If you're an independent contractor filing for unemployment and you're a realtor, because you may go 3 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever, without a commission check and they get one, the way the unemployment process works is you have to report every week. And so 1 week you report and you have income, then your check will be adjusted, or you may not get one the week that you report income. The weeks that you don't report income, then you will get a check, and that's the way it's been explained to us. So it's a matter of weekly reporting. It's not a matter of you get a commission check and suddenly become ineligible. We talked about that with Chris, I think, last week, and that's still my understanding unless there's been a change. So Chris and Brian, Rebecca, if you guys want to add to that.
I wouldn't have any information to say that's changed. I know that the governor has loosened nearly every requirement, every restriction to ensure that the people get the benefits as quickly as they can. They've gotten rid of the need to look for new employment. They've gotten rid of the need to certify on a weekly basis, to my knowledge. But I know that we haven't done anything to undo what the governor originally instructed the commissioner to do, and that was to, basically suspend every rule and provide the funds.
And I think that's the case. I just think the unanswered question issue is just because of the backlog. And so people they just don't know. Chris, do you have anything?
I mean, from everything I've read, I think that is true what you said. This pandemic unemployment assistance for self-employed people actually runs from 1/27/20 until 12/31. So they can collect it for 39 weeks. So they're going to get paid retroactively, I believe, when they, are eligible to or are able to register on Friday night. And then the federal pandemic unemployment compensation, the extra $600, kicks in on 4/4 or kicked in on 4/4, and it runs to 12/31. So there's an additional basic 12 weeks of that on top of the West Virginia. So I think they'll be eligible for all of those benefits for any week that they're not earning money.
Okay. Any other questions? I know you guys are busy, so I don't want to keep you on any longer. You're welcome to stay the whole time, but I don't want to keep you on any longer. We have to. Any other questions for the governor's office? Wait a minute. I got three more. Wait a sec. Got three more popping up. Can small businesses like boutiques, barbers, et cetera, if they limit their number of people and if the customers and employees both wear masks, are they going to allow to be open?
At some point, as we begin to turn this thing back on, we're going to consider the social distancing, the ability to provide protective wear, the spacing, et cetera, and hope to build that into some kind of phased-in program as we move forward. That's part of our plan right now. You're seeing that in other states as well. But obviously, that'll be when the governor gives the all clear and puts out his plan to take down some of the previous orders.
Okay, I got to keep watching this chat. Sorry, before I give you a final release. I think, okay, the other two questions up aren't really questions for you. They're for some of our other panelists when we get to them. So okay. with that, guys, I appreciate you doing this for us. And like I said, let us know if there's anything we can do to help.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks for having us.
All right, with that, guys, we'll turn it over to Brian Green from NAR. He turned off his, there he is, so I thought maybe he left. And I know you operate the Fair Housing office, Brian, but if you'd share with us your title, because I'm not sure of that exactly, and then I'll turn everything over to you.
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Oh, great. So I'm the director of Fair Housing, and this is a position that NAR created last year. NAR created a governance committee called Fair Housing Policy Committee. And so I'm the staff executive for that committee. You may all know that NAR has historically had a diversity committee, and they kind of crammed in fair housing policy under that in the past. but a lot of issues come up that warranted a dedicated committee on fair housing. And I would say, like, almost as soon as I arrived, a number of issues hit the fan. I don't know how much news this made out in West Virginia, but the New York folks were dealing with a Newsday story that exposed discrimination out on Long Island, showing that about 40% of minorities seeking housing from the top companies out there, the companies responsible for 50% of the sales on the island, were facing some form of discrimination, whether it was steering or just different terms. And so really, like a month after I started, this became a big issue. And of course, what occurred out in Long Island is not unique to Long Island. And so we've been identifying, what the unfinished business is with respect to fair housing that we need to address throughout the country. So I'll speak a little bit about that, but later. First, I just want to point out that, of course, April is Fair Housing Month, and this has been an unusual April, atypical in many respects. I mean, obviously, most of us are used to realtors being out and full force selling homes. Even 2 months ago, things were so different. But this April, as we observe Fair Housing Month, is proving, what T.S. Eliot said, that April is the cruelest month. Breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, and stirring dull roots with spring rain. And knowing that April was going to be really different this year, NAR decided for Fair Housing Month, it would put resources online and help people that way. If people were going to have more time, they could use that time to get training and consult resources. So if you go to the NAR website, you will find that we have a fair housing section called Fair Housing at Home, which provides books on fair housing, films with fair housing related themes, podcasts, articles, and some information on fair housing organizations. So really, basically, we're spending time right now on the computer. Since we're all on the computer, it's an opportunity to scroll through different fair housing resources and check them out that way. If you're like going out for a run or a walk, you can check out a podcast or what have you. So so by mid-March, we reoriented and put those fair housing resources online. This April is also, with COVID-19 amidst the land, it's raising a whole new breed of fair housing issues. So Connecticut, for example, reached out to us to point out that fair housing groups were putting out guidance that said, without further explanation, that COVID-19 is a disability, and that as a disability, it needs to be treated. People with COVID-19 need to be treated like any other person with a disability. And it was just a sort of blithe statement, which of course had all kinds of implications. And so, in an environment where everyone's making sure they don't get this contagion, which could lead to death, for just a very simple statement that came out of the fair housing group concerned a lot of people. So I put the Connecticut Association in touch with outside counsel that we've been working with on different fair housing issues. And they put out some guidance so that realtors could balance these questions. So let me just first say that we don't know if the law would consider COVID-19 to be a disability. It very well could be, but there are no cases yet. I think there's maybe one employment case that's come up recently. But our outside counsel says, all right, well, we don't have cases yet, but the most conservative position and most cautious position to take is to assume that it may be, because after all, COVID-19 can lead to death, and like the general definition of a disability is that it impedes one or more major life functions. And COVID-19 shuts them all down potentially. So knowing that, we still have to balance those issues with public health. And so, unlike say anybody else with a disability who wants to see a home, if showing a person with COVID-19 is going to put someone at risk, obviously that's a criterion for folks to consider. So Connecticut put out some guidance based on what this outside firm put together. We, as NAR, are about to put out some guidance. But the crux of it is, we're dealing with a serious public health issue, and those issues are paramount. But at the same time, you need to be sensitive to these questions and make sure that you're treating everybody the same, and that you're focusing on the public health concerns and not anything else. So obviously, let's say if someone's, if the COVID-19 issue was in the past, and you're talking about showing a property, if there are ways to show the property without putting yourself at risk, you don't just wholesale refuse to deal with the person. So it works through some of those different contexts and the things you need to take into consideration. So the NAR guidance we'll be putting out very soon. I can also make your association I can make available to your association Connecticut guidance, which the national guidance is going to be quite comparable to. So expect that. Of course, COVID-19 has raised other issues, and before this became as big as it is, we were seeing people of Chinese background facing harassment. It should be obvious to all of us that you don't, treat anybody differently because they're Chinese. Italians were facing some issues in the early days, so obviously we don't treat people differently. So that is not that complicated. Hopefully we appreciate all those issues. I think the bottom line is, making sure that you've got policies and practices that you apply to everybody. And we also see possibly on the radar other fair housing issues down the line. In many states and places, African American community has been particularly harmed. Probably more true in some of our urban areas. We have to be alert to whether or not agents or multifamily property owners are quizzing African American families more than others, those kinds of things. And again, it's important to have consistent policies where if you have public health concerns, that you're asking those questions in the right way. You're asking them of all people, not just because you think they are the background who are more likely to have the virus, had the virus, and will be more susceptible to the virus. So those kinds of issues, this guidance is important. And lastly, I'll say that we are also putting online, hopefully by the end of April, but if you miss April, that's fine, it'll be up there. We're putting up what's called implicit bias training. Sometimes people call it unconscious bias training. And there's a group that we're working with called the Perception Institute, who are kind of the leaders in this kind of training. And if you looked at the New York Newsday story about discrimination out on Long Island, while some of the stuff seems blatant and you can't really explain why agents would say those things, it's possible that some things that agents are doing, they're doing unconsciously. It's possible, for example, if you're asking an African American to give you a loan approval letter, loan pre-approval letter, and you're not asking whites, then maybe you don't know you're doing that. I find it a little hard to believe, but maybe you don't. This kind of training really helps people work through what's called implicit bias, sort of bias you may have, but once you recognize it, you can program yourself great things about the trainings this group has done in the past. We're going to put a 1-hour training up on the web at the end of the month, and then we're going to make available to brokers a 3-hour training that they can do for their agents. So you'll get a good taste of it at the end of the month. This company is fascinating because we're all shut indoors. They're producing this out of a few apartments and editing it, and splicing it, film and archival stuff. And so we're going to do this remotely. So we're looking forward to that. So that's a big thing coming. And then beyond that, we continue to implement a rigorous fair housing program. Right after the Long Island News Day thing, we came up with an initiative that the leadership team of NAR endorsed right at the beginning of the year called ACT. And that emphasizes, when it comes to fair housing, accountability, culture change, and training. And so we're looking at things to make sure members of NAR are accountable to their code of ethics, that we're doing things to make sure that we're embracing a culture of fair housing, and that we're also providing the training that people need. So we sort of take it backwards. We've got to provide people with training so they have this technical understanding of what their obligations are. But if they don't embrace it, they don't have a culture, their company or whatever, the best training is not going to really make a whole lot of difference. So we have to do some things to make sure we're promoting a culture of fair housing. And then finally, at the end of the day, we have to be holding people to the code of ethics. We need to make sure our state laws, state licensing laws, state training is building this in so that it's a professional requirement and there's some consequences to flow it off. So we've got a raft of things that we're doing to make sure all of those things happen, even as we shelter. We're putting contracts into place that can move those things along. So while fair housing may not be foremost in everyone's mind right now, we're doing all this stuff because, we will reanimate. These dull roots will bring forth again into new life. So realtors are going to rise up from this, and when we do, we need to make sure we've got the training, we've got the background, we've got the commitment to move things forward for everybody. So I want to thank you all for having me on this call today, and I'm happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Got one up from you in the Q&A, Brian. Has NAR considered providing? It just disappeared. Has anyone at NAR? No, the question disappeared. Has anyone considered offering any free at home with diversity or other class? Here it is. At home with diversity AHWD class free of charge to its members this month?
So I know that they're offering at home with diversity, and I want to say it's discounted. That's I'm 5 months in here, so I'm not entirely sure. I don't work on that course directly, but I think I saw that it was discounted significantly. I can ask, and maybe if they haven't made it free, maybe they can make it free for the remainder of the month. So I'll certainly look at that.
Okay, I will tell you too. We've got a couple of messages that we're getting some feedback from your mic.
Oh no,
that makes it a little noisy. So I just wanted to let you know that. Any other questions for Brian about fair housing? Fair housing issues in NAR?
Ray,
Someone just commented in the box that regular price was $99, and the at home with diversity class is now being offered for $49 through June 2020.
Okay, so there you go.
So it is discounted.
Yeah, I'll tell people, folks want it for free, but I can't promise anything.
Drew, did you have something?
It seems like
no, Ray. I was just going to point out that it is that specific program is being offered through the Right Tools Right Now initiative for 50% off at this point in time.
Okay. That's so. Is there any, if showing there, is there any violation of fair housing laws if we show vacant property? Question from the crowd.
I'm not sure if I understand the question. You have an
I'm
idea?
not sure. I'm
Yeah.
not sure what the violation would be.
Yeah.
I mean, so my answer, being absent any other information, is no.
Right, right. I mean, I think I've seen a lot of questions come up that aren't exactly fair housing questions, but, you know, illustrate people are being sensitive to like the rights of, say, current residents. So not necessarily fair housing question, but I've seen concerns, say, about, say, someone renting a property from an owner, and the owner wants to show it, and the current renters are concerned about having people come through the unit. So that's not really a fair housing question, but, you know, NAR has, you know, encouraged people to consider other ways to show property when there's that potential public health risk, both, you know, to every party. And so maybe the question is coming from that angle. Obviously, if it's a vacant property, everything's a lot easier. But even there, you know, I think it's up to the agents to figure things out. I don't think it's fair housing question.
Okay, fair enough. Any other questions?
Is the feedback on, by the way?
It's a little better.
Okay.
Any other fair housing questions? Anyone? All right. We'll go on. We'll move on. Brian, you're welcome to stay in case there's anything that pops up. And now we'll just start our normal round robin. Let's start with Jerry. Do you have anything?
I've got a couple things today, Ray. Thanks for having me again. Earlier, when we first started, there was some conversation about courthouses being open, and one of the questions that we've been getting a lot lately have been, is there anything we can do about that? And, you know, we don't have any control over that whatsoever. Those are up to the counties. But I do see...
Jerry, you're getting a lot of feedback, too, on your mic.
Okay, how about now?
That's
Can
a little
you hear me
better.
okay?
Yeah, that's a little better.
I'm actually getting someone else talking when you're talking too. I think it might be Jeff.
I just muted him. We're good now.
Okay. Courthouses. I think there may be some potential out there for complaints being filed. I've gotten several calls this week, and it all stems around the ability for access to the courthouses so that the proper title work can be done and things like that. The only thing I can suggest to you, brokers and salespersons, is that keep in contact with your clients. Let them know what's going on. If you cannot access a courthouse, maybe you could call and make appointments. I know that a lot of the courthouses are appointment only, but I just want to let you guys know that that is becoming an issue. We're getting a lot of complaints about that, and I don't want that to fall back on the brokers, because really there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing we can do about it, except you need to keep your clients up to date. So just keep that in mind. I've been getting a lot of good comments on the CE courses from Zoom. I guess you had one yesterday, Ray. Got some good comments back on that.
Yeah, we just did a minimal test run, but it was it went. I thought Nedka was going to join us, but she didn't, unless she used a secret name and joined us. But
she may have.
But everything went well, and everybody we put a lot of people on it that didn't even need continuing education, that we just wanted their evaluation of it, and so everything went well. So we're ready to go live, and we'll probably make the announcement in the next couple of days and put the links
That's
up.
great, because we've been getting a lot of calls about that too. People wanting to know how they can sign up for those courses. So I'm assuming you're going to be sending that out.
Correct.
Okay. And then just the last thing is renewal starts in 9 days. We've been getting a ton of calls in the last couple of weeks since the letters went out about renewal. A lot of folks simply aren't reading the letter. The renewal system does not start operation until May 1st. So if you go online and try to renew, it's going to tell you that you're already renewed because it's looking at this year's information, not 2021. So that'll roll over on May 1st at midnight. So that's the first time that you can renew online. And I think I mentioned to you last week that we are going to waive the fee for paper renewals this year. I filed the paperwork this morning with the Secretary of State's office. So if anybody wants to go look at that, the suspension letter is now on file with the Secretary of State's office. And there's a whole slew of them out there from different commissions and boards and agencies where we're trying to help out by suspending some of the rules that could be a hardship during this period of time. But other than that, business as usual. We're doing really good, keeping things going, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Jerry. If anybody wonders what I'm doing when I flip my mic up and down, it mutes me. So I'm not just fiddling with it. Any questions for Jerry? Chris, we've got and I'll if any pop up, I'll bring it. Chris, I'm going to go to you next because we've got a lot of unemployment questions and other questions about that. So that I'll just, before you even start, I'll just throw these at you. I'm a realtor and a sole proprietor of a hair salon. Will I be eligible for unemployment for both businesses?
Well, you are eligible for unemployment for both, but you have to remember that unemployment in West Virginia is capped at $420 a week, plus the additional $600 federal pandemic. So the most you can collect in unemployment is $1,020 per week.
Okay. Will we have to repay the unemployment money received? Does it have to be repaid?
Unemployment does not have to be repaid unless you would collect it in a week that you also maybe collected a commission. So those payments in those weeks would have to be repaid. But I would caution you to remember that untaxable. You will owe federal and state income tax on unemployment next year on your tax return. So please keep that in mind and be prepared.
When you apply, my son actually asked me this today. When you apply for unemployment, can you ask them to take taxes out of the unemployment check, or do you have to wait and pay them?
They will withhold 10% federal tax, but for whatever reason, they don't withhold West Virginia tax, which is West Virginia unemployment. Doesn't make much sense, but that's what they do.
Okay. Jerry, I got another couple that popped up for you, and then I'll get back to Chris. One, if we have an agent switching brokerages at the time of renewal, would there be a way to waive the change of brokerage fee?
That would have to be something I bring up with the commissioners. That's not something we do generally, but that is something that if someone requested, we will run it up the flagpole, sure.
Second question is, any update on when testing for licensing, pre-licensure licensing will start again?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. We got an update on Monday, I'm sorry, from PSI, and PSI has now postponed everything until May. They are just having a difficult time, I think, getting the process in place for how they're going to work this out with their testing centers, and they're getting a little bit of pushback. So as it stands right now, it's going to be probably, I would say, at least 2 more weeks before they start any type of limited testing.
Okay. All right, Chris, go back to you if you've had other things you want to talk about.
Not really. I think the unemployment goes live Friday, and the Senate passed the additional money for the payroll protection loans. Hopefully the House passes it today or tomorrow. And so if you're considering doing that, you want to get with your bank sooner than later. Make sure they accept those type of loans, that they participate in the SBA program, and get your documentation ready. And I can't stress enough that you need to get your Schedule C prepared on your earnings for 2019 so that you are eligible for them, that loan.
Ray, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, Chris. There was a question that vanished. Maybe
Okay.
someone answered it about the $600, the extra $600 for eligibility. Isn't that just the when you became unemployment and whether it was a result of COVID-19 or not?
Well, I mean, it's supposed to be for COVID, but I mean, I think anybody can make the case that they're unemployed because of COVID right now. So the $600 will apply to any unemployment claim that's approved by the state. You'll get the additional $600, even if you're not eligible for, the max in West Virginia is $420. But say you made some earnings and you're eligible for $100 this week in West Virginia, you'd still get the additional $600. And I think I saw a question about a husband and wife, would they both be eligible? And the answer is yes, if they were both, salespeople.
Okay. Will it be the SBA loans, the folks that missed out on the first round, but they applied and the money ran out? Is it going to be, or will they be eligible from when they applied or when they get the money? Does the clock start ticking a different place now?
Well, the clock will start ticking when they get the money. But I mean, there's really it doesn't really matter if you make money while you're doing this. I mean, that's not part of the program. It's to reimburse you for 10 weeks or 2.5 months of your what you made in the prior years. So I mean, and it caps at 100,000. So I mean, everybody's basically eligible for $20,000 under that program if they get the application in and their bank, accepts it and they don't run out of money again.
Okay. What let me see. How does Social Security impact unemployment? If you're drawing Social Security check.
If you're working, I don't believe Social Security impacts unemployment. Because typically you're not doing both. So I'm not 100% sure of that, but I don't believe Social Security affects unemployment if you had other earnings and you can collect on it.
Okay. What about is the unemployment going to be retroactive back to March, whenever it is, once it?
Yeah, the West Virginia program is actually going to be retroactive back to January 27th, and the federal is retroactive back to April the 4th.
Okay. What about new realtors that have not yet earned any commissions? Are they eligible for unemployment?
Possibly. It said in here that if your job was affected because of COVID, and your job went away, you were eligible even without typically you would need 18 months of earnings to collect unemployment. They appear to be waiving that. So I believe if you were licensed and could be a realtor, you probably would still be eligible for the unemployment under this pandemic program.
Okay. All right. Then I'll go on. And if anybody pops any questions of Kristen, I'll bring him back. Let's go to Brad. And you've got some issues you need to follow up with us from last week on.
Okay, off mute. Thanks, Ray. Last week we, I don't remember if we did it on the Zoom conference or if you and I talked about it later, but in any event, you had me look into the issue of whether or not it's a good idea to have some kind of COVID release that we've seen popping up here and there. And the basic forms that we were seeing was just basically having buyers and sellers release the agents and brokers from any liability if the customer caught COVID-19 during the course of the real estate services. And I had somebody from Harvard Law School, no less, research this for me. And the answer we came up with is it's really not necessary. In fact, could cause some problems. I mean, the bottom line is you're not going to be liable for this unless you have some good reason to believe you're infected or present a risk. And if you do have that, the release is probably not going to save you anyway. See what happened here? My screen changed. Can you still hear me and see me?
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
I wonder what happened. Let's see. All right.
There you are.
Sorry about that. Yeah. When you think about it, the real estate business, it is just a business. I mean, we're all still going to Kroger, on a daily or weekly basis, and we're not signing a release when we walk into Kroger. We don't sign a release when we go to the gas station, and from what I've heard, that may be one of the more dangerous places. One thing that it did occur to me that might be useful is just some kind of almost a COVID sheet that could be handed out as an explanation of what the agent or broker is doing and why it's as a result of or in response to COVID-19. And it's certainly not intended as a matter of offense for the customer. For example, the agent could be saying, I'm going to be wearing a mask and gloves when we go into a house, and I'm going to try to maintain recommended social distance between us when we're walking around, even though this wouldn't normally be the case. Things like that kind of remind the customer that they ought to be doing the same thing without putting the realtor in a position of accepting responsibility for them. One of the interesting things that the research showed on this was that the problem with the disease, first of all, you're releasing yourself from something that might be foreseeable. So when we get into this release in the first place, it's tantamount to saying, well, it's foreseeable that you might catch this as a result of what we're about to do. But the problem is, this is an infectious disease. And if that were the case, it's not stopping with the customer, because you know that the customer is going to go home, perhaps to wife and children, other family members who might then catch the disease, but they haven't signed any release with you. But by bringing the release out in the first place, you've indicated that you think there's some foreseeability that this is a problem. So, I guess I come down, where I land is that these releases are unnecessary, and there's some possibility they could cause harm.
All right.
That's all I have on that.
All right. Thank you. Got any questions for Brad? Jeff, I see you have your hand raised.
This went back to Chris. I'm echoing. Hold on. There, hopefully that's better. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Question back to Chris, if I can. I was trying to catch him while he was on. Okay.
He's still here.
A couple of things about the unemployment. All right. Say, as a lot of our realtor members will have two jobs. Say they're still receiving income from one job, but their income has ceased as far as on a commission basis as being a realtor. Would they still qualify, though they are partially employed with one job with no income coming from the other?
Probably not. It really depends on what their income is. So if they were making more than $420 a week in their combined, or in the one job that they're still doing, they wouldn't be eligible for West Virginia unemployment.
What about the $600?
Well, you have to qualify for the West Virginia to get the extra $600. So if you qualify for $10 of the West Virginia unemployment because you made $400 and the limit was $420, you'd get the whole $600.
I got you.
Over the $420, you get zero.
Okay. All right. So if you're still earning at least the $420 or whatever on your second job, then you wouldn't be eligible for either.
That would be correct.
Okay. And if someone is on Social Security but also carries their broker's license, but they're not earning anything from their broker's license, but they still are receiving their Social Security check?
If they're not doing anything with the broker's license, probably not, because you're going to want something to substantiate earnings. So if they worked in 19 and they had a 1099 and a Schedule C and can prove that they were working, then yes. But some earnings that no.
Okay, well, I thought Social Security earners, people on SSI were receiving or the $1,200 check.
Well, they are getting if we're talking 1,200, yes, they get the $1,200 check. I thought we were talking about unemployment.
Okay, well, I guess, talking about both at the same time. My mistake. Okay, well, thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you, Chris. All right, Drew. Now I'm glad to see that you finally stopped shaving like the rest of us. Except for Jerry, he's still clean shaven. He's not joining the crowd. Anything you got? Anything from NAR for you? From you?
Hey, Ray. Yeah, quick update. You're right. I really need to take a razor to this, but my hair is getting longer and there's not much I can do about that. So, at some point you just kind of give up. So one thing quick disclaimer or reminder, I guess, that I say each week, continue to keep an eye on our landing page, nar.realtor/coronavirus. There's constantly updated information there. Specifically the FAQs that we have on a variety of different topics. Those are continuing to be updated. And I'm sure now that this new legislation has dropped, there will be more information in the coming days there as well. Since there was a question about the At Home with Diversity program earlier, which is a part of our Right Tools Right Now initiative. If you go to our homepage, nar.realtor, you'll see a link there for the Right Tools Right Now initiative, which will take you to a different landing page that has a variety of resources, programs, courses, and different things there that are available to realtors for free or discounted rate now that otherwise would not have been. So the program we were talking about earlier, the diversity program, is just one of many options there for you. So please take a minute to check that out if you're interested there. The only quick update, as someone mentioned earlier, the Senate has reached a deal on legislation, kind of termed phase 3.5 in this COVID relief legislation. And the reason it's being called 3.5 is because there's really no new policy coming out of this. It's essentially just replenishment of the depleted funds for these programs, the PPP, EIDL programs through the SBA. So just a couple top lines on that really quickly. It's $310 billion in new cash for the PPP program. 60 billion of that 310 is specifically for small and medium-sized community banks. In addition to that, there's another 50 billion appropriated for the EIDL program, the economic injury disaster loans. And there's some money for hospitals and testing as well, 75 billion for hospitals and 25 billion for testing. So again, just kind of a injection of more cash into these programs to keep them moving forward. We do expect that it will pass the House as is over the next maybe day or 2 days. And of course, the president, I think, intends to sign it into law likely before the end of the week. That's it for me.
All right. Thank you, sir. Any questions of Drew? Chris, I've got another one for you. If you didn't file 2019 federal state income tax, are you eligible for unemployment?
I think they're going to be liberal with the rules and allow you to, maybe submit your copy of your 1099 showing your earnings and or bank deposits, bank statements. But I would encourage you to try to get your 2019 return done because you may need it for this.
All right. Got a couple of new faces I'll turn to first before we get to the rest of our crowd. Mark Slotnick, closing attorney down in Charleston. Mark, how's the closing world doing under this whatever we want to call it, pandemic?
Well, we have adjusted. So I think all the closing attorneys have done differing things on how to do closings at a distance. If you come into my office, for example, I'm doing just what we're doing here. I've got video conferencing in each of my conference rooms, and you step into a conference room, I sit right here and do a closing. The governor's office, as well as Secretary of State's office, has given us tools to work with. So as far as in-person notary and relaxing those rules, so you're probably seeing some of your closing attorneys work with that as well in emergency scenarios so that we can continue closings. I have done some closings where people have been at home because they just cannot get here to do a closing. And then Fannie Mae, as well as Freddie Mac, has issued their own regulations in regards to what they're calling a RIN, which will be remote ink signed notary. So that means you're signing at home and then you're overnighting back to us, and we're actually notarizing in the office. And they've set some regulations and rules for that as well to keep the closings flowing. You also look at our title insurers for their guidelines and what they're willing to insure. So very early on, they had agreed to insure what we call the gap, the period of time between when we did the title search and then the time we could actually record if the courthouse was closed. So because the first fear was courthouses would close and then what? Well, the title insurers will allow us to insure through that. The Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and lenders were acceptable of that as long as that gap coverage was offered. So that's been, our life has gone on. It's been a little bit different. Obviously, we had early on asked realtors and other people that were not necessary for closing to not be at closing, so that we only had the actual signers there because we needed to keep separation and keep the closings flowing. The only additional thing was there was mention about courthouses being closed. Courthouses, clerk's office should be working with people if they need documents. So they should at least be available by phone. And if they are not, let Ray know, and then Ray can let me know. I've been working very closely with the Clerks Association to make sure we can continue to do what we do, because we want to make sure we don't stop that flow. And we've been trying to advise everybody how important it is that clerks are into the system we have to try to get closings completed. So it's a quick, short synopsis, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Got one for you. Should the buyer purchase title insurance for the gap you were speaking about?
Absolutely. And we recommend that at closing, because we don't know what's going to happen between when we did the title search and when we close. So even courthouses that are open, they're open on limited hours. So if we close, say Kanawha County, for instance, we close at 2 o'clock, we may not record for 2 days once we get the packages together. So that ensures a lot of people should be getting title insurance now, because we really don't know what's going to happen. We're generally trying to put it on the closing statements. Some lenders don't particularly want us to do that, but we do encourage them to do it at closing. And we also, in talking about waivers and such, we have big bold-faced print says, please, we recommend that you purchase that.
All right, Chris, I got another one for you. Is the 420 net or gross?
That is gross.
All right, now we've got Dave Hauser and Mark Heitzman, both two of our lenders that we work with. So no fighting, no rivalries, and no advertisements. But Mark's already got that T-shirt on. But any updates you guys want to offer on the lending side of things? What's going on? I can't seem to hang on.
No, I think I was muted, Ray. Sorry about that.
Yeah, both of you are. Dave, I can't seem to unmute you. I'm trying. See if you can do it.
Dave's got to do it.
There you go.
Yeah,
nope,
Ray.
There you go.
So I want to thank you for having me on. And hey, Mark, if I could ask you a question, if I could just sidebar real quick, the gap insurance, I think that, is it not covered in the lender's title insurance policy that would be purchased? Oh, he's muted.
There we go. I'm unmuted. So I use Zoom all the time, and I couldn't figure out where the button was. Yes, it is included specifically. So but that does not cover the owner. So that only covers the lender. So if something happened in between the owner, if they had equity in the property, they would lose their equity in the property.
Okay. So, I just wanted to get your clarification. That's been a subject of a lot of debate in our industry. But so yeah, we're we feel for you guys. We especially thank the title companies for being on the front line. We thank the realtors for being on the front line during this. At Movement, we have basically about 4,000 people across the country all working from their houses. In our ability to do applications and process loans and close loans or get them ready to go to the attorney for closing, we've probably been more productive and more efficient in what we're doing because we're working from home without the distractions of an office and or the people walking in and things like that. For the most part, there's been some reaction in the lending community. Lenders like Prime with Dave and with Movement and other lenders across the country, and especially in the state, West Virginia Housing, putting the brakes on some of the programs that they would do last week with basically stopping their program in in conjunction or in combination with any kind of a government loan program and limiting it to just the just to conventional type of transactions. So there's been some definitely been some pullback. Lenders have had to protect themselves from the overhang of forbearance and unemployment. You know, so we've seen it, and you know, and there's been some good decisions that have been made. We just like everything else, though, when everything first started to happen, the industry lurched in one direction as far as it could through an action of basically just as being as conservative as it could, and then it began to settle back down. And so we were one of those. We kind of lurched out to where we said, hey, we're going to sell government loans with credit scores under 640, and we just did some things yesterday to pull back to where we're going down to 620 on government loans, and we're removing a lot of other overlays that are part of it. So I think that you're going to see everything shift back slowly, right? It's not going to get back to where it was 6 months ago overnight. It's going to take a little bit of time. What say you, Dave?
I say we need something on this screen that says WVAR squares, kind of like the old Hollywood Squares game. I've been watching this, all of us on here. I even shaved for today, Ray. How about
or
that?
the Brady Bunch, maybe.
Or the Brady Bunch. That's a good one, too. So now, thank you, Ray, for continuing to do this. I think it's a great resource for everybody in the state. It's great to stay together as a community, real estate and finance-wise. But for all the realtors and brokers out there, yeah, great job being community leaders. I think more importantly than ever, you know, to continue to instill confidence in the folks that are buying. This is we're still dealing with interest rate lows for the last 40, 50 years. So it's a great time to buy. It may not be the most convenient time to buy, but if you've got people that are out there kicking it around, you really want to try to encourage them to take advantage of the market as is. Because it may get better, but it certainly is good as we've seen in a long time. So continue to push your buyers to buy and your sellers that this is a great time to take advantage of the market. The government loans are still going strong. You know, as Mark referenced, there's some volatility all over the place. Every lender's a little bit different in what kind of risks they're willing to accept. And so, again, like I've talked in the past, I think it's important as you on the front lines are out there talking to people, you are aware of who their lenders are, what that pre-approval letter looks like, and if it's got any age on it, you want to get that updated because these guidelines are changing all over the place. And forbearance, as I mentioned last week, it plays a big part in this. And as we see the forbearance numbers tick up, I mean, right now we're about 6%. They're predicted to be possibly 25% before this is over. So, they're not to dwell in the gloom, but it could get, it's supposed to get or could get a lot worse. So, and as that happens, you're going to see a lot of lenders continue to retract and retreat some of their guidelines. Just based on the unemployment numbers continuing to go up and the forbearance claims come in. The FHFA did give some guidance to servicers that provided a little bit of relief, and you'll see it in today's market. The rates improved a little bit. So a lot of that confidence is because of that, and that's today. So the headlines do drive the market, especially in today's world. There's no other real good predictor to what's going to drive the market than what the headlines are speaking of. So, again, thanks for all you're doing out on the front lines. This is always a great conversation, but be aware of your buyers and the lenders that they're using, and just make sure that they understand that if that they are qualified still to this day before you put it in contract in ink. Make sure you understand where they're at today. And if you have questions, reach out to anyone that's on this call or local. Your local lenders are your best resource in today's environment. So take advantage of it.
Great, thank you. We went a little longer, but I thought we had a lot of good information today. We usually don't go past an hour, so I'll go ahead and wrap this up because we see some people dropping off. 3 things. 1, if you haven't filled out your census, fill it out. It's important in West Virginia. We need it for our to protect, if we can, and protect our 3 congressional seats. If not, then we're likely, and we may likely go to 2 anyway, but we don't want that to happen. So please, if you haven't filled out your census reports, fill them out. You heard earlier, Jerry and I talking, that continuing education was, the test run was a great success. And we are going to, for information on that, if you need your CE, watch Facebook page, watch our website. That's where we're putting this stuff out. We're doing Facebook Lives to keep you up to date of things in between these weekly meetings. So keep watching us on there. And finally, the last one is for Chris. Wait a minute, I got 2 questions coming up. But Chris, as soon as we're done here, tell Jay I'm on my way. The questions for the lenders. At what point, if you lose your job, won't you pre-qualify?
No job, no loan.
Yeah,
That's it.
yeah, no job, no loan.
On the forbearance for sellers, is that 90-day and due on the 4th month in total, or the individual mortgage companies? Lots of mixed info out here. Everything that I've heard, and tell me if I'm wrong, guys, is that the forbearance goes on the back end. It doesn't go on the front end, but maybe some lenders are different.
You know, they haven't really inked that out yet. So it's really going to be up to the servicer on where they're going to put that. It could be in the middle. You know, there was a little bit of scare about it being a balloon payment at the end of the forbearance. But, you know, ideally it would go on the end, but it's really hasn't been determined.
That's right.
That's I can only speak for. I'm on the board of a credit union, and we've already made that decision to put ours on the end. So, but I guess it's up to each individual lender.
Yes.
Anything else? No more questions popping up. Anything from anybody? All right, guys, thank you very much for joining us again, and watch your email. We'll be doing it again next week. Again, please email if you have anybody or any issues or topics you want us to address, and we'll certainly try to do that.
Great. Thank you, Ray.
See you guys.